know, it doesn't matter what walk of life you come from, your race, religion, whatever. Chances are that the legacy of HBCUs and their graduates affect more than one aspect of your everyday life. HBCUbiquity.
Yeah. Welcome aboard.
Welcome to a new episode of HBCUbiquity. I'm your host, Thomas Joyner Jr. Question. When it comes to the academic term STEM, what does the S stand for? You already know. S stands for science. And for the past 125 plus years, HBCUs have a rich legacy of producing groundbreaking scientists. From Dr. George Washington Carver at Tuskegee, to Ernest Just at Howard, HU, to Percy Julian at Fisk, and Carl McCullough at South Carolina State. Science is another area that our schools excel in. And today, groundbreaking advancements in science are currently taking place at Howard, at Hampton, at Southern and Florida A&M. Shout out to what's happening at North Carolina A&T, Meharry, and Prairie View. These HBCUs and more are advancing in a wide array of areas. I won't go into the specifics, but Google their media releases and be impressed for yourself. We can and will do a future episode about the socioeconomic reasons why science is academically more comprehensive in some schools as opposed to others. But for this episode, let's talk about how to identify and foster even the slightest interest into the how and why things are. In this episode, we'll talk with Ms. Jennifer Stimpson, a Dillard alum and current science teacher at the Hokadays School in Dallas, Texas. Ms. Stimpson will talk with us about HBCUs and the sciences today, along with some recreational and academic tips and pathways for our future scientists. So kick back for a few minutes and let's pull some knowledge to pass on to the next generation. Welcome to another episode of HBCUbiquity. Welcome back to HBCUbiquity. I'm joined now by educator, innovator, and scientist, Ms. Jennifer Stimpson. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you guys?
Doing well. How are you today?
Oh man, I'm enjoying like the last 5 minutes of my summer vacation. When I say 5 minutes, I literally mean like these breaths of air are just like sucking my life away until I have to go back to work.
So speaking of work, how did your time and experiences at Dillard lead you to a career in science?
So interestingly enough, my background in science was spurned from my parents, who happened to both be pharmacists, and neither of them wanted me to go to pharmacy school. They're HBCU alums. Shout out to Texas Southern University School of Pharmacy.
All right.
They inspired me to consider getting a science degree. And so I ended up at Dillard. And what I loved about going to Dillard is that the classes were really small and I was able to find my niche in those small classrooms. I had great advisors. I had great people who motivated me. My first year, I had a mentor, Dr. Marva Smith, rest in peace. She saw something in me and said, Jennifer, I want you to go far. And so she made me study hard. She made me work hard. And because of all of that, she said, find your role model. And so I happened to find some role models. And those role models happened to be females who were majoring in biology. And I didn't want to be a biology major because in my time, if you had a biology degree, all you could do is work at the zoo. We know that to be different now. But the experiences that I had in Dillard were definitely impactful because of the several opportunities that I had from there launched my experiences far better and greater than what I had I gone to a different school.
It's interesting to hear because usually when I think of STEM in New Orleans for HBCUs, I think of Xavier.
Yes, exactly. And then also when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor. And then of course my parents are pharmacists. So you would have thought automatically, XU would have been the choice that I would have gone to, but it wasn't. I definitely didn't want to be a pharmacist. And the idea of going to medical school with getting experience at Xavier was an option, but it just wasn't the option for me because you just kind of know what you know. And I wouldn't trade my experiences from Dillard at all. I have plenty of XU friends. Shout out to my my Saints fans and my black and gold friends at Xavier. But Dillard was for me.
Now, I know you to be an advocate for science opportunities for Black children.
Yes.
But why are you so passionate about that?
So before I was a teacher, I was a scientist. I used to volunteer in a community in West Dallas. And my experiences there as a volunteer, I used to go into these classrooms, and the classrooms in those in those schools at the time were non-existent. The science in those classrooms were non-existent. So they didn't even know what science was other than just a word and maybe like thinking like it's a tree or an animal, but they didn't have any concept of what it meant to be a scientist or what science was about. So interesting enough, I gave up my job as a professional chemist to become a teacher so that kids who lived in these dilapidated neighborhoods didn't have to miss out on those opportunities. Let me tell you, I got a lot of backlash because people are like, oh my God, you're making, $11 million a day being a scientist and you gave all that up to be a teacher. But for me, it was more important that the kids recognized that science was a real thing than to let these kids continue to go out into the world and not even have a concept of what that meant. So I'm passionate about that because I think from that experience, it made me realize that there had to be work done because I'm trying to build something that's going to outlive me. And that whole thing of making sure that the next generation is prepared scientifically is what I want to do.
But science also, at least, in my travels, seems to have a perception of being one of the more costlier type of hobbies to pick up when you start, looking into the cost of magnifying glasses and, all the lab equipment, that kind of stuff.
Right. It is. I mean, if you want to be a real scientist, yeah. But see, the other thing is, and I think we're going to talk about this later, is what do each of the letters mean? I will tell you that the S in STEM, as I think it continues to be the underrated because it's the lowest paid profession in the S. So when people are applying for jobs, they're going out for the T and the E and the M because that is where the money is. Technology and engineering and then analytics, which we'll call math, because I'm definitely not a STEAmer, I'm a STEMmer. Okay. And so mathematically, you need to know how to do statistics and economics. That's all math all day long. And the S in STEM is biology, chemistry, and those professions don't top off with a bachelor's degree, with more than like $50,000. It's like getting a degree, and that's all you're going to make. But if you're a scientist, as getting a technology degree and engineering degree, just with the bachelor's, you start off with like $75,000. And don't go get a master's because then you're already in the six figures. Mm-hmm. Don't have a specialty, then you're going to be highly recruited to go get a PhD so you can run the world. So the S is underrated just because I think it's the lowest paid profession. And then we don't also encourage our kids to go be chemists or biologists, not anymore. Because if you think about it, when we were in school, biology was the gateway to medicine. Everybody who had a biology major was going to medical school because that's you needed to do really well on the MCAT, and the MCAT was biologically heavy. So everybody took the biology classes so they could be an MCAT. So they don't talk about, how chemistry was the precursor or is the precursor for pharmacy. So if you decided to be a pharmacist, all you're doing is taking advanced chemistry classes. But with chemistry, that gave you a different medium to make a living for your family besides just having a biology degree. Because most people, and I'm only speaking from the generation that you and I are in, most people didn't get a biology degree. They got a pre-med degree. And that was like a newfangled word. And that meant the blending of all of these different sciences where you just kind of got like an exposure, just like a feel good so you can do well on the test.
And so with that said, Jennifer, for listeners of this podcast, that have children or relatives that are interested in the sciences. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what are some tips that you can give that can be utilized in high school and even college to eventually be a future scientist?
So I actually want to take that not even to high school. I want to take it down to middle school.
Okay.
It's really important that we capitalize on influencing these kids before they even get to high school, because really by the time they're in ninth grade, they kind of already know what they want to do. So research tells us that during adolescence, that 9, 10, 11-year-old time frame in the kid's life, which equates to third to about sixth grade, kids kind of decide what they want to be when they grow up. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of firm in what that means. And so starting them earlier, gets them to be high schoolers. So let's say, your kid tells you, hey, Dad, I want to be a scientist. And you're like, well, son or daughter, what do you want to be? And you tell them. So by the time they get to high school, the activities that your kids should be doing should be directly related to whatever that field is. What people don't want to know or want to do is the research that it takes to find these opportunities that kids can do. So for example, there's an opportunity this summer at a medical school here in Fort Worth, where they gave free a day of free classes where kids got to learn about how the eye works. And, kind of like the idea behind why you need glasses and how glasses work and the science behind the evolution of the eye and the vision. And that was a free all-day science camp for kids. And so we have to look at what science camps mean and what they are, and don't just limit them to museums, because there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of what I call second tier science camps that are being offered at campuses. You just have to do the work to see what's available and put that out there. And as far as high schoolers and collegiate people, I was one of those kids that every summer I did an internship or a research component. So you have to do the work to see what kind of opportunities are available at the schools you want to attend, and then go and be free. Shout out to Chapel Hill. I did a 6-week program there. I did a 6-week program at Baylor. I did a 3-week program at Dillard before I actually went to Dillard. So and my very first one right after my freshman year was at Meharry Medical College. I mean, I actually got to do some cadaver studies. So it's all about what's out there. We just have to do the work to find it and make it happen.
Let me go back to something that you mentioned earlier. What do you mean by second tier camps, and how do you find and identify those?
So I said second tier because they're not all corporate sponsored. So meaning like people who have nonprofit organizations who are just putting out flyers saying, "Hey, come to the Jennifer Stimpson Science Camp." Those kinds of camps. How you find about it? We live in a world now where we're socially connected. So there are flyers. I was actually at Starbucks, one of my other hangouts, and I happened to see a flyer on the wall that said free STEM camp for kids. Sign up here, take the little tag and call this number. It didn't give me much information on the flyer, but when you call in or go to this website, you probably could learn more information. So you have to look to see what's out there. I have a friend that's in New York, and he started a Shakespeare and STEM camp where the kids spend half the day learning poetry and the other day blending poetic words into a scientific component. And at the end of the day, at the end of the camp, they do poetry and science, where they're doing these experiments and then writing raps and writing poems and doing a lot of visual display and artistic display about the work that they do. So I really think that we have to do the work of finding those non-corporate camps, but look for those opportunities that are non-traditional, which means, put in the work or ask around.
Okay. And so in your experience with HBCUs, and just from your perspective, what advice would you give to HBCUs that want to foster future scientists besides, of course, having more camps?
So yeah, camps would be great. If you'd be interested in hosting a camp, then that's another way to expose the next generation to you. Even, finding corporate sponsorships to hold these research projects. I mean, that's how I was able to go through my undergrad year every summer. It was corporately sponsored, these research projects where I had so much experience. So, with HBCUs, they also have to be willing to do the work. But I think that with funding, you get money, it's not going to a science camp or a business camp. It's going to fund something that's more important on the campus, or more needed. I won't say more important, that's immediately needed on the campus. I think that some of the things that HBCUs could do is to find those camps find individuals who are willing to continuously host camps and expand those opportunities into things that are bigger, and then do things non-traditionally. We still live in a world where STEM has an affinity for being nerdy and not cool or sexy. So we have to demystify what it means to be a scientist, because I don't look in the mirror and think I'm a nerd. I just think I happen to be a girl who's really into some really different things, and being different is okay. Thank you, Michelle Obama, for letting me but she coined being smart. And so I just remember growing up, we clown people, or they clown people like me who were sitting at home doing differential equations, or sitting at home doing the biology. But it's no different than people writing raps all day. I mean, I might look at them like they're crazy. Like, what are you doing that all day for? When you could be building atoms to create a new type of chemical feature or something. So it's just we have to demystify what it means to be a scientist. And I think that HBCUs could really help out with that, because part of the culture is who are you and what are you bringing to make this unique. And so I think that translates into an opportunity for a new vision and a new voice and new experiences that far too long have been unclaimed and unappreciated.
Who else influenced you to be and to do what you're doing today?
Besides my folks and my teachers, I think I was just one of those, curious kids growing up. I always wanted to know more. I wanted to understand how and why things are. I was one of those kids that got popped in the mouth because I always asked, well, why? But I was never disrespectful. I always wanted to know what happened. I remember when I was 7 years old, I went to see the King Tut exhibit that was touring. And I remember going through each of the halls, and by the time we got to the end, you could actually see the mummy and all that. And I remember asking the curator, how is it that this skeleton, because that's what I called it back then, how is it that the skeleton can still be here all this years? And so my little 7-year-old mind was saying, what's preserving it? What's keeping it there? And I wanted to understand, what happened. I also did a lot of studying for, with Mount Vesuvius. One of my dreams and goals is to go digging in Pompeii. That's on my bucket list because I want to know, studying geology and knowing how the chemicals in the rocks, how they come to be. So just you ask, what influenced me, and I think it's just my curiosity and my passion for history played a role in science. Now, how would history play a role in science? Because I consider my ancestors, the ancestors that were brought over here, the enslaved people who brought over here, they were the original doctors and lawyers. They were the original medicine men because of their techniques and their science, they instilled in their next generation, and they saved people, they healed people, and they all they did was use the nature that was around them, the sustainability of their history and of what mattered to them played a role in that. And I just want to pay homage to that through my lens of science.
So in closing, Jennifer, for our listeners who have children or nieces, nephews that may be interested in science, what advice would you give to them to help foster that interest?
So if you're new to the field of science, go talk to someone that you admire. So I find this interesting. People are like, oh, I want to be a scientist. The first thing that they do is they go get an astronaut, or they go get an astrophysicist, or they go get somebody who has this really awesome degree or this awesome title. But what they fail to recognize when that happens, I see that so often, is the steps that it takes to get to become an astronaut or an astrophysicist, even a doctor. There are so many steps that are involved. And I think we need to start jumping rather than all the way to the end, because that takes a lot of energy to do, but we need to jump smaller. Go visit your neighborhood pharmacist. Go and visit a retired doctor. Go and talk to the people that use science in everyday experiences, and then know what happens. For one of the things, what do women do every day? They do their hair. We still have women that are, still getting perms, and there are women that are all natural. What are we doing to foster the next generation of girls who know how to make natural hair care products? We need to figure out what's happening right here in our neighborhoods so we can understand how girls can dye hair and create dyes. That's all science. That doesn't have to be entrepreneur. We see a guy that's a barber. We think that he's just out there making money, but there's a skill. There's all that physics that's involved on how you cut your head. Some dudes have flat heads. Some dudes got that extra meat on the back. How do you get around all that? That's all physics. So it's all about the lens in which you're trying to expose it. And again, I go back to that demystification. But if you have a young child who wants to be a scientist, you have to first define what that means and take out the monetary connection to it, because it's like being a football player. Everybody who goes out to try out isn't going to make the team, isn't going to be the millionaire, isn't going to play in the Super Bowl. Right. It is, what is it going to take for you to get there? That means that those small steps and that practice and that influence, because any guy that's playing the Super Bowl will tell you, it was Mr. John who took the time to teach me. It was Miss Jones who took the time to teach me. So that's what's happening. They're not saying, oh yeah, I met, Tony Dorsett, and he was the one that told me I could do it. That's like that would be the connection of the astrophysicist talking to a kid. It isn't that. It's the local people who motivate them to get to the next level and to inspire them to take action.
Well, I could not have said that better myself. Thanks a lot for that.
Yeah.
Educator, innovator, and scientist, Ms. Jennifer Stimpson, thanks for this conversation today. This has been really informative and really helpful.
Thank you so much. And I hope that the next generation of scientists, figure out what they want to do and go change the world.
Great. And we'll be back with more HBCUbiquity. This is Thomas Joyner Jr., and you're listening to the new HBCUbiquity. Yeah. Welcome back to HBCUbiquity. I love doing episodes like these, talking about other aspects of HBCUs besides the normal. Of course, that's not to say that we won't be delving into HBCU football, HBCU basketball, bands, and homecomings over the next few weeks and months. We have to support our future scientists as well as all of our HBCU students. Now, if you've listened to previous episodes of this podcast, You've heard me ask on more than one occasion for you to make a donation to support our HBCUs. But now I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm giving one $250 book scholarship to an HBCU student. So if you're a student or if you know of an HBCU student in need, hit us on Instagram at HBCUbiquity. And that's spelled HBCUbiquity. Hit us with the student's name, email address, and HBCU attended. After that, please check back on next week for another episode of HBCUbiquity. I'm Thomas Joyner Jr. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.